If you are interested in equine therapies, you have probably come across one of the two main camps that are being shown on social media right now. Neither of those two camps are giving you the full picture.
In this podcast, I invite you to my world where horses and people heal each other. It's an honest, passionate, and sometimes uncomfortable conversation where I allow us to speak up. My name is Christina Marz, and I teach emotional healing through the wisdom of horses all over the world. My home base is in the Andes of Ecuador, where I live with my herd of rescued horses, dogs and cats, and 3 teenage boys.
Here I am sitting at my desk in Ecuador on my farm, contemplating whether I should delete Instagram or change my profession. I'm here because I've watched this industry from the inside for about 20 years. I've been teaching in dozens of countries, and I think there is a pattern worth naming. I feel compelled to educate what it really entails to do equine therapy, to create a helpful session, to facilitate something that is safe for everybody involved, which is the horses, the client, and the facilitator, what it takes, and why these Instagram reels that look beautiful, so nice, why they are dangerously misleading. So let's dive into it. Camp 1, the riding-centered model, is genuinely client-centered. The exercises are thoughtful, the physical benefits of riding are very real, especially for motor development and coordination. But as we use tack, that itself removes something important, or which is important to me, which is the direct sensory contact between the client and the horse. And if we put a bridle and reins in the horse's mouth, that changes everything about consent, so to say. The horse is now being directed and not really consulted. And that's not where I want to be working. I want to give the horses a genuine voice and a genuine opinion in the sessions. That's why my model is called horse-guided empowerment. So let's look at the opposite. Because in the opposite, there are the horses at total liberty. They're approaching the clients by choice, by free choice. And the horse's freedom is real, and that matters. That's also how I work. So the client is approaching, the horses are coming in, they are doing something, the facilitator interprets that as something being released, and that emotional release is genuine, no doubt. Horses do bypass our cognitive defenses, and people do cry real tears next to a horse. I have seen that a million times happen. The horses are simply standing there and something comes up in the clients and they start to cry. And that is good. But a release is not the same thing as change. But if nobody trained in trauma-informed care is holding that moment properly for you, with the herd, then it can just as easily tip into dissociation and re-victimization as into healing. And that especially happens when the facilitator is interpreting what is going on for you. So if the facilitator looks at the scene and says, the horse is doing this, the horse is taking that away from you, you are now that. That is very dangerous because as a facilitator, we never have the full picture. And it's very important that the client themselves can give meaning to the situation that is unfolding with the horses. Right? The horses are taking tension away from us. They are helping us to release something, to connect to our emotions. But the one who judges that or the one who interprets that has to be the client, because we need a practical bridge back into the client's actual life. Here's what I want you to remember. No relief, whether shaman-led or horse-led or a therapist-led, will translate into your actual life if you don't do your own work during the session or afterward. You can cry as much as you want next to any horse in any field, and you don't even need facilitation for that. That's not the therapy. The therapy is setting a goal, understanding what it is exactly that you need to release and deciding it for yourself, not having somebody else tell you, and then what you build with that moment once the tears are dry. Because you will go back to your real life. And the horse experience should be an anchor for you, not the weakest moment of the therapy. And then we have the third camp, so to say, which is systemic constellations with horses. A fabulous tool. They are genuinely powerful. They are perfect for herds. The horses love doing them. I facilitate constellations myself. And it's really important to say that before we go into the critical points. Systemic psychology is very complex, and it's not something that you can learn in a weekend. It takes years, really years, to hold a constellation safely and to know what to do when something unexpected happens, to know how to choose the phrases that you use to repair something for the client, and to know how to guide that unpredictable, ever-changing field that the herd is showing for the client and that you are supervising and modeling, right? It's not that the facilitator is a bystander just letting it happen. You have to modulate it and you have to supervise it so that everybody is safe and that the conclusion of the constellation is actually something new, because otherwise the horses will just show what is, and then that's where you're stuck, which is not helpful for the client. And that's exactly where the problem lies. A few years ago, I spoke to an audience of about 200 people in a bigger conference in a particular country. And in that country, constellations with horses have become super popular, right? So I asked, how many of you have experienced some healing therapy sessions with horses? And everybody raised their hand. So of 200 people, almost everybody said, yes, I have done something with horses. And I asked them, how did it go? What did you do? And most of these people had done a constellation with horses, and most of them said, I didn't get it, it didn't help, it felt weird, or the horses were just decoration, we were constellating with people, and the horses were just standing around us, which has its benefit. The horses will give us their heart field, but that's not a constellation with herds. And those who did one all narrated something to me in which the constellation showed them what is, which is great, but then it got stuck there. It didn't evolve. It didn't come to a conclusion. There was no real benefit. There was a vision of this is what's going on. And that's exactly where you get stuck, because the horses will show, even with an unexperienced facilitator, they will show what is going on. But then you need systemic knowledge to evolve it and to bring it to a good conclusion. And we do that in constellations with the repairing phrases. And those are hard to find. So if you're not relying on activities that are easier to implement, even by unexperienced or non-psychologist facilitators, finding the phrases is hard. So constellations is like, I would say the top tier, like the cherry on the cake of equine facilitated interventions. So let's see what does it actually need for a good facilitator to lead a safe session with these three different camps. In my perspective, a good facilitator gives the horse a voice, because we do want to not abuse the horses as a vehicle. We want to invite them to be a partner of our sessions and of our therapies and interventions. So we give the horse a voice genuinely, not just as a marketing phrase. And that is tricky, because the horses sometimes say no, and the herd sometimes doesn't interact or says something that we don't think is the best way to show the client what they need to hear, because we want to take control of it. We need to choose the herd carefully. We need to make sure the herd is open for interventions and able to do interventions. They are in harmony themselves. And we need to stay completely attuned, which is a lot of delicate and very disciplined work, to stay neutral and to stay attuned to the subtle signs with patience and absolute neutrality. Super hard, right? I'm not saying it's easy. It's very hard. And that neutral observation means that We cannot impose any conclusions on what the horse is telling the client. We can create a safe space that is held with expertise and with knowledge about horses and about psychology and about facilitation itself. But we are not allowed to say the horse is telling you that, or this means that. We should give it back to the client and have them use the metaphors of the horses and the herds to understand something about themselves. If we put ourselves onto a pedestal where we pretend to know everything that's going on in the field and to understand the client and to know what they need, then we're doing it wrong. A good facilitator, a safe facilitator, needs to know how to ask questions without leading the client toward an answer. And I have seen that the best people to do that are lawyers, right? I have people who go through my course from all walks of life, from many different professions, people who want to change their careers. And lawyers are specifically trained in asking questions without leading the client toward a desired answer. And that is also quite tricky. So you need to learn how to ask an open-ended question. You need to regulate yourself before you are asking something, because otherwise your emotions are creating a field that even that is leading the client towards one side or the other side. And you need to regulate yourself before you want to regulate anyone else. If your herd is experienced, they will ask you, they will push you into regulation. But if you're starting out, then you really need to learn a tool that helps you to regulate, even though your client is maybe highly anxious, neurotic, or scared, or irritated, or frustrated, or something else. And those two parts, asking correct questions and regulating ourselves, protect everybody who's involved, the client, the horses, and ourselves. They protect us from distraction, from overexposure, and they also protect us from misleading, from leading the session into a direction where it's not supposed to end. The actual exercises that a facilitator offers also matter. There is not a standard one-size-fits-all intervention plan, right? The process is very flexible, it's very personalized, and those exercises are usually built around projection, right? The client projects something onto the horses, onto the herd, onto the interaction of the different herd members, and onto the exercises that we are proposing. So they could project a goal into a hula hoop. They could project a flow of a project into moving the herd. And they need to have a clear and specific goal in order to do that projection. And when we have that, the goal and the projection, then the horses turn into a tangible metaphor the client can work with. And then we can find a closing that actually lands somewhere instead of just stopping and saying, oh, so this is what it is. And now the horses have magically released something and now goodbye, come back next week, because you can only release and heal in my presence. I want them to understand something, to get empowered, to use that understanding in their real life and then repeat it. I want to make them independent and empowered so they don't need me anymore. I don't want to create dependency, which is also one of the paramount foundations when we do real therapeutic work. The client cannot depend on us, and we cannot create this projection with us as therapists. When we do the projection with the horses, that's okay, but we cannot create dependency on the horses. Well, and then there is one last point, which is the most difficult one, which is turning a session into content. And we have all seen it. I have wanted to turn a session into content to show what we're doing and to show the benefit. But honestly, client confidentiality is one of the most important parts when we do therapy, when we do therapeutic work. If I want to record a session or turn it into content, even if I want to interview the client afterwards and ask them for their feedback, that session will lose depth, because somebody who knows that they are being recorded, that they are being interviewed, are not going as deep into the really maybe dark sides or scary sides of their emotions. They will keep it superficial. It's a normal process. It is our own like safety response, our own switch so that we don't become too vulnerable. And if a client has been extremely vulnerable in a session, and I record that and record their tears and maybe their narrative about their personal family situation and turn that into content, then I'm directly breaching client confidentiality, even if the client said it's okay. Because in that moment, when they are so open, so raw, so vulnerable, and also grateful of what has just happened, they will sign anything. A client in that state is not capable in some way of deciding if their personal story really has a place, a legit space in social media where millions of people will see it for the coming years. That's not okay, right? Our personal stories, our own, even if it's a healing experience, does not belong into a space where strangers can look at it, can misinterpret it, can take the content, turn it around, can create something else with it. That's not okay. If it's real therapeutic work, it should not be recorded. It should not be turned into content. I shouldn't even do a feedback interview right after the session. That's not what we do. That's not ethical. So if you are thinking about either finding a provider for equine therapy or finding a trainer for equine therapy, if you're considering to become a facilitator or taking sessions for yourself or for somebody you love, there are some questions I'd actually ask. Do not go with the beautiful photos that you see on Instagram. Ask, does that provider have a client release form? That means that you are taking responsibility for what is going to happen in the session, and they are taking responsibility for their part. That is important. If somebody has a professional practice, they need a client release form. And they should have a written code of ethics. And that code should be displayed in their barn or somewhere where clients can see it. And that's a code where they commit to being to working in an ethical way with the horses, with the clients, and well, like obeying some code of conduct of their specific line of work, right? It's not the same for everybody, but there should be one. Okay. Then, if you want to learn it, or if you're going to somebody, have they followed a structured learning process? Or have they been in a single weekend, single day workshop where they became an equine facilitator? It's not that easy. It's not super complicated either. You don't need a PhD in psychology, but you do need a structured learning process. And in that structured learning process, there should be some science. It's not just anecdotal learning, and it's not just intuition and energetics. There is science behind this, why the horses behave the way they do. Look at their credentials. And I'm not saying like a PhD in psychology. That's not the most important credential. They need to know horses, and they should know horses for a long time, not just last year I got into horses. Learning to read the horse's language is not something that we can learn in a weekend either. They hopefully have published something. They hopefully have a structured learning process, and they hopefully include some actual science into their process. Then, if you're trying to learn it yourself, if you're becoming certified in some equine assisted guided learning, healing, anything, there are some providers who have you prove your competency before they certify you. That could be with a writing, like a paper, or it should be with a supervised session. If they don't ask you to document your work with clients, it's not worth it, because you will never be able to prove if you're actually doing a good job, and they can't really analyze what you're doing and if you got everything right if they don't have you practice and analyze that in a supervision. To be honest, it's just selling you a title. And that's not safe. Not for the horses, not for you, and not for the client. If there is an external accreditation body that controls the certification, that's like best practice, highest standard. Most of the certifications are just self-issued, which can be okay, but there should be some official certification process so that you can also make sure everybody else who shows up with the same title has gone through the same process and has the same actual knowledge that you have. Because otherwise, the certification is not really a certification. It's a training where everybody can walk out with a different level of learning, right? There can be somebody like the top A students who got it all, and there can be those who, well, just were present, got the same title, but don't actually have the same knowledge that you want to acquire. And then maybe the simplest question of all, do they genuinely respect client confidentiality? If they don't, it's not therapeutic work. Then it could be maybe well-being or wellness, or you can call it any way you want, but it's not therapeutic work. So I really believe that therapy is not content. It should not be content. It's delicate. Sometimes it's raw. It can be ugly. It is completely unpredictable. It's private, right? Therapy is private. And if I lead a session, I'm planning to narrate on a reel, then I will stay as a facilitator, I will stay superficial by design, and the client will stay superficial by design because they know that they're being recorded and that they're being portrayed later. And if I record them without them knowing, then it's even worse, right? So the real work doesn't perform well on camera. And that's exactly how you know it's real. Choose wisely who you trust with your training, with your healing, with your sessions, and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much for listening. And I'd love to hear your stories. I'd love to hear your comments. What is your experience? What have you seen? What would you like to know? It's always important to hear from clients, from horse people, from aspiring facilitators, and from colleagues alike, and to create a group, a special world where we can talk about everything that this entails, because it's a quite complicated profession. We need to know a lot of things. We need to know horses, people, psychology, facilitation. It's not easy. And if we have a group of like-minded professionals where we can speak up, discuss, and also hear different opinions, I think that is really enriching for everybody in the field. So I'd love to hear from you. Have a good day.